Alright, you want to do it standing up?
However you want to do it.
Yeah, however.
Which, you're going through chapter 1 or you're going to
Yeah,
chapter
it's
2?
this one right here.
Because I don't know these. I was looking at them and I was
Well,
like,
let me grab a code book. I'll show you how I find the answers. So this chapter 1 is basically just the introduction and our chapter 1 of the. So chapter 1 in here is just chapter 1 in here.
Yeah.
And the introduction is Article 90, and that's not really in chapter 1. It's just a little introduction, and it tells you like what the code's about. You know. So a lot of those answers. A lot of those questions are from the introduction.
And that's all this book is. It's going through like these questions. It kind of goes through there.
It just goes through. Yes,
it's just,
exactly.
It's
so
just not everything. It's just some, right?
Right.
Right.
So like 90.7 is right
These
here.
are pertaining to these questions. Like I
Yes.
was just reading this.
Yes.
It was talking about this page right here. I was looking
Yeah.
to see readily accessible, and then I just had
Yes.
to turn here. And it was
Yes.
showing what I was just looking at. I noticed it was talking about not
Yes.
readily accessible.
So article like readily accessible and within sight are terms that are used in the NEC all the time.
And that's
In
what you
Article
want to
100.
know is what article it's referenced to.
So Article 100 is all the definitions, right? That are used in more than one section. So if it's just used in that section, like child care facilities are just used in that one section of special occupancies. So it defines it in that section.
Right.
If it's generally defined throughout the code, like within sight from means within 50 feet and then you can see it, right? So if you were on a roof and you could see it, but it was 75 feet away, that's actually not within sight.
Right.
So the way the code defines a word, sometimes it makes up words like ampacity, it just makes it up. So that's why this is a good book to start with, because it shows you how it talks about, we say receptacle outlets in the code, but a lot of people call that an outlet.
Yeah.
But an outlet is not what we consider a receptacle.
Right.
An outlet is just any kind of transfer, like a box that transfers electricity.
Right.
It doesn't have to have the what we call a plug.
Right.
But you never see words like plug or wire nut
Right.
in the code. So this is kind of a good way to start you out. But let's just get right into it. Ask me the first question. I'll show you how I find it. Hold on, I'm grabbing a highlight. So I think it's really important, instead of highlighting that book, to highlight your code book.
Mm-hmm.
And I got code books in there for everybody. Gary got us all code books, and I have extra copies if anybody needs one of the old one. Yeah, these are just copies I made. But you can mark these up, whatever, toss them. Doesn't matter. Whatever you do with these, they're outdated anyway. They're going to use it for the people taking the test right now. They're going to use the 2020 code, but pretty soon they'll be outdated. So let's go through a question. What do you got? I like to go backwards. So I like to look at the questions and then try to answer them. You get unlimited tries on the test.
Okay.
So I would just take the test, and then it'll show you what to look for in the book. So let's go for the first one.
Start with the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 1. The first blank chapters of the NSC apply generally unless they are modified by the later chapters.
So it's the first 4 chapters. The first 4 chapters are general, like general requirements for wiring, the neutral conductor. They call it the ungrounded conductor in the code, and it kind of shows you all that stuff. So it's the first 4 chapters. Okay. Then after that, it's special occupancies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Special conditions and special equipment. Those are 4, 5, and 6. And then 7 and 8 are kind of independent, communications equipment and stuff. And then chapter 9 is just a bunch of tables.
Yeah, I remember that. And all the tables. Chapter blank of the NSC is independent of other chapters, and none of the provisions apply unless they're directly referenced.
That's chapter 8.
Chapter 8.
Yeah, so that deals with communication equipment and stuff.
Equipment designed to open circuits under fault conditions shall have an interrupting rating not less than the available voltage and circuit current at the line side of the equipment. True or false?
True.
Where'd you find it?
So that would be in here. the definition of circuit breaker says design to open and close a circuit without damage to itself and properly applied within its rating. So I don't know that that's specific to this, but it's referring to a circuit breaker or a fuse.
Right. And that, what you highlighted said what? Open or close, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is only asking open, but it would still fall in that same.
Well, open means open. Yes, this says open or
I'm
close.
just saying what this is saying,
Right.
but it's still in reference to
Right.
that definition.
Right.
What locations are subject to moderate degrees of moisture, but are generally out of the weather?
So that's what is defining there as a damp location. So that's false because it's asking if it's a wet location. So the way the code refers to it is location dry, location wet, and location damp. So if you look here, that's the definition that it just gave you right there, right?
Mhm.
Location is protected weather, not subject to saturation or water or other liquids, but subject to moderate degrees of moisture. So that's a damp location.
Right. And that's tricky because they say wet locations.
Yes.
Again, it says, but are generally out of the weather
Exactly.
and a certain degree of moisture.
Exactly.
A short circuit is the unintentional connection of two grounded conductors that have a potential difference between them.
True.
Yep. That's something we know anyways.
So maybe your previous question is better answered by this definition of the interrupting rating. The highest rated voltage at devices identified to interrupt under conditions. The other question,
Yeah.
that might be better answered by that interrupting rating. But a lot of times you'll find that as you're going through the code, you find out.
Yeah, see something else.
Yeah.
Equipment that is required to be readily accessible shall be capable of being reached quickly without the use of tools, with an exception for blank.
So the exception is for keys.
Keys.
Yeah, keys. So like that panel right there,
Yep.
you could lock that thing up.
Yep.
And it will still be readily accessible.
Right. A conductor's blank is the amount of amps it can carry continuously without exceeding its temperature rating.
That's ampacity, and that is, like I was saying, it's right here. The maximum current in amperes that a conductor can carry continuously on the conditions used without exceeding its temperature rating. Let's go back to the previous question. There's accessible as applied to equipment. There's accessible as applied to wiring methods like Romex and stuff.
Right.
And there's accessible as applied readily accessible. So readily accessible means capable of being reached quickly for operation, renewal, or inspections without requiring. Those to whom ready is requisite to take actions such as use tools other than keys is highlighted. So that's a new addition to the code, to climb over or under, remove articles, or resort to portable ladders and so forth.
Right.
Generally, the stuff that you're going to be highlighting is going to be on a test.
Yep.
So, I mean, other than this test.
Right.
Like, the three, I've taken 4 state exams so far. RW, JW, Masters for Colorado, and JW for here, and all this shit was on all of them.
Yeah. They're all going to be the same, basically.
Yeah,
There'll be
they're
little
gonna
changes,
be-
but
yeah.
once you know it, you can take
Once you
any
know where it
test.
is,
Take
you know
any
exactly
test.
where to find it, right? So
Yeah.
I know this is right in the definitions. Oh, readily accessible. Let me check the definition. It's right in the beginning of the code.
Right.
It's going to be Article 100.
Absolutely. What's the next one? Boxes installed within walls that are required to be taken down to gain access are not considered blank.
Accessible.
That sounds right to me. Where would you go to find that?
Right here. Same area. Different
Accessible
definition.
readily and readily
Capable as applied to wiring. So accessible as applied to wiring methods is capable of being removed or exposed without damaging the building structure or finish, not permanently enclosed in by the structure or finish of the building.
Right on. The word blank indicates that the NEC rule is mandatory.
Shall.
I knew that one
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It says shall, that is.
So if it's may,
for sure.
you're allowed to do it. If it's
Right.
shall, you have to do it
Right.
that way.
Yep. And that's something good to know.
Make sure the we're still rolling. I think we're in frame. I think we're good, brother. That got They made us so good looking, you know. They might have not made us smart. We may be a couple
Make up
meatheads,
little books.
but we made up for it.
Right on. The NEC is revised and updated every 6 weeks. True or false?
Every 3
Every
years.
6 years. Sorry.
It's every 3 years.
3 years. Correct.
So that's false.
Yeah. At least 2 entrances to electrical rooms shall be provided to give access to the working space. About all electrical equipment rated less than 1200 amps.
So instead of around the equipment, it says about the equipment.
Okay.
And what's it telling you there? That's false. It's telling you 2 inches.
2 entrances.
Oh, 2 entrances.
2 entrances
Right,
to electrical
so-
rooms shall be provided.
So that rule applies if it's over 1200 amps. So that's actually false.
Okay.
And you're going to find that in the next chapter, 110, requirements for electrical installations. And this is going to tell you the entrance and exit requirements, the space about equipment. It says about instead of around.
Right.
But this is where you'll find it. I'll find it here in a sec. Let's go to the next question.
All right. The basic rule when selecting termination devices is to always use a termination device identified for the type of conductor material. True or false?
True.
Always use termination device identified for the type of conductor material.
So what it's probably referring to, without kind of in a roundabout way, is if you're putting an aluminum conductor, you got to put it on a termination device that says ALCU.
Right.
So if you put it on one that's just doesn't say anything, that's rated for copper, and it's going to cost dissimilar metals, and then it'll mess up.
Right.
By the way, people resolve that by putting nail locks.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
Yep.
so that aluminum doesn't oxidize.
Right.
That's actually not needed. It has never been needed.
Okay.
Except for a very short time in the code where actual aluminum conductors were allowed. They removed that from the code very quickly because it caused a lot of problems.
Right.
Now, all aluminum conductors, what we consider aluminum, are not aluminum. They're aluminum alloy,
Okay.
and they don't oxidize.
Okay.
So the code doesn't say you have to use Nylox, and you don't have to use it. Now, if you're by the ocean, you want some extra protection, sure.
Right.
We're not in that condition. Maybe you're in a saltwater facility, you don't want oxidation for that, sure. But the code doesn't say, as a rule, they have to use it all the time.
Right. Maybe just for
Probably
long-term
good practice,
kind of thing. Yeah.
but it's not
It does
required.
help. I know long term.
I know inspectors will be like, oh, that's an aluminum conductor, it doesn't have it on the thing, you should fail this, whatever.
Right.
No, it's not required,
Good to
especially
know.
for the aluminum that we use now, it's not required.
Same thing. Gotcha. How about the
Oh, one more thing. The code does say that if you use it, that it must be used according to the specifications. And if you look on the container, it says you have to scrape it with a wire brush, immediately dip it, and also coat the termination device.
Right.
And most people don't do it that way.
No.
They don't scrape it, because if it's oxidized, let's say you're one of the people that believes that aluminum is going to oxidize. That's why I'm putting Nylox. It's going to oxidize. Okay, scrape it.
Yeah.
So you scrape off the oxidative coating, dip it right away, and then coat your termination device. If you're going to do it, do it right.
Do it right. Absolutely.
Do it according to the manufacturer's
I agree.
instructions.
The twofold purpose of the NEC is to protect blank from the hazards associated with the use of electricity.
So that's back in 90. That's back in Article 90, where it tells you the purpose of the code. And it tells you the purpose of this code, is the very first sentence. The purpose of the code is the practical safeguarding of persons and property.
Right.
It's not an instruction guide. It's not untrained people. You can't train apprentices with this.
No.
I'm sure all of us have had, I know I did when I was an apprentice. I saw the code, I was like, oh, I'm going to grab this. I'm going to check this out. It's going to make me a great electrician. And I looked at it and I slammed it shut and I was like, I don't know what the hell they're talking about because it's so arcane. But that's why this is good. It kind of shows you how to use it.
Right. That's what it's about. It's how to use it.
It's
You're
not
not gonna
designed for
memorize
apprentices. And
No.
you're not going to memorize it. It's going to change every 3 years anyway. Why would you memorize it?
Right. Yeah. How about most voltages referenced in the NSC are blank voltages?
They're nominal. They're nominal voltages. So what we mean by that is when you're testing it, you're going to see, you're testing 120, 240 volt system. You're going to see 119, 239, something like that.
Right.
They're nominal voltages. So it's not referring to the actual voltage. It's the nominal voltage of that system.
Right.
And that's kind of the way we
Right.
talk about systems in terms of nominal voltages.
Well, you're not. It doesn't. You normally don't find that.
You're never going to
exact.
find the exact voltage.
Yeah. Interpretations and approval of equipment are granted by the blank.
The AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction. So usually that's your county, building department, like an inspector or something like that.
Okay. Which in the next question says, the AHJ can permit alternate blank for installation if they believe the installation is equally effective at meeting the intended objective.
Alternate means. They can allow alternate means.
For installation?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's something they have the power to do.
Yes.
So you get with them or they make that call and some things may change.
Yes.
As long as they still feel.
And I'm looking for it under the AHJ definition, and it says they have an organization officer, individual responsible for enforcing the requirements of the code or standard for approving equipment, materials, installation, and procedure. It's used in a broad manner. It might be the commanding officer on a military installation. I've run into that, where I worked on military installations, but that's the definition there.
Pretty much, though, they have the power.
They do.
Although installed in conformance with the NSE, all electrical installations may not be adequate for blank expansion of electrical use.
Future. So you can run a wasteway, code it by the code, and have plenty of room according to the inspector, right? But you got to add 3 circuits to that. They didn't know that. The person doesn't have it. They got a different type of occupancy coming in there. They're going to need a lot more receptacle outlets. You didn't size it for that. It's not a design specification. There'll be a couple more questions along those lines.
I've heard you say that before. Next. The NEC is not intended to be used as a or an blank specification.
A design specification,
Just
not
like
a design.
we just talked about.
Yeah. It's not a design spec. And it's not an instruction manual. But the answer that it wants is design.
Explanatory material appears in the NEC in informational notes.
See, like this is an informational load. So it's talking about a listing right here, like a UL listing, and it's saying informational load. The Occupational Safe and Healthy Administration, OSHA, recognizes qualified electrical testing laboratories. That's usually UL listing.
Right.
But there's other ones.
Right.
There's like ETL. And so that thing defines a listing, and then this informational note tells you more about it.
So that's true.
That's true.
Definitely. The minimum headroom of working spaces about electrical equipment in commercial buildings is 6.5 foot. True or false?
See,
minimum.
I said true, and it marked me false. Because the reason we're doing this is we're both kind of doing this course. It marked it false. So I'm not sure why it did that. But I can show you here in the code where it says 6.5 feet is the headroom.
Right.
It's in 110. So I'm going to stick to what I said. I think they're wrong.
Where does it talk about headroom? What does it say?
It's
Well,
working
that kind of
spaces.
makes sense if you say that, though. The minimum headroom is 6.5 feet. That would make sense. You want
Maybe
at least 6.5 feet.
maybe it's talking about maybe it's talking about the space equal to the width and depth of the equipment and extending the floor to a height of 6 feet above the equipment to the structural ceiling, whichever is lower shall be dedicated to electrical installation. Oh, that's why it's 6 feet. It's not 6.5. It's 6 feet. See? So that's why that's false.
Right.
I thought it was 6.5 as well. It's the switch. The main disconnect can't be higher than 6.5.
Yeah, that's
where you get it mixed up.
That's not necessarily headroom. That's a different deal. Okay. Electrical equipment with ventilating openings shall be installed so the openings are not obstructed to prevent the free circulation of air.
That's true.
The NEC may be used as a design specification by qualified persons.
False.
It's not a design.
It's not a design spec.
Right. If the AHJ finds the equipment or installation to be acceptable, it is blank.
Approved.
Approved.
So it has. We have different definitions, right? Like listed is different. And I think if you had a multiple choice question, it is a multiple choice question when you go to answer it.
Yep.
Listed will be one of the questions, and listed is not have anything to do with AHJ, right? It has to do with
The
underwriters.
keyword here
laboratories.
is acceptable.
Right.
Telling you that it's good to go.
Yes.
So approved makes sense in that one.
Right.
Blank conductors.
And not to interrupt you, but you're right to go to the keyword.
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to find what the
That's how
question's
you find
asking.
it.
And it's very tricky. So you got to make sure you know what
Yep.
the question is asking.
So this proves that you're right. So that was the key word, acceptable. And here's the definition. Approved means acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction.
Right there. That
Right
is
there.
a definition question
Yep.
to a T. Blank conductors are conductors not encased in the material recognized by the NEC as electrical insulation.
Where I can think this comes up is when they're talking about an equipment grounding conductor. Sometimes they say bare, insulated, or covered. So what covered means is that insulation is not THHN or whatever we're looking for.
Right.
Whatever we're used to. You know, we're used to THHN, all the, or a bare conductor. Well, for certain conductors, they allow you to use a covered conductor, which means the insulation is not really by the NEC, but for that specific thing, you can use it.
Okay. That's interesting.
Now, they'll tell you what gauge it has to be.
Right.
So, to identify those types of conductors, they call them covered.
Covered
Yeah.
conductors.
It's not a bare conductor, but it's not an insulated conductor the way the NEC defines it.
Right. Something kind of odd.
Yeah.
Connectors, couplings, lock nuts, and bushings are examples of electrical blank.
Fittings.
That's what I was going to say too. Blank means recognized as suitable for the use, purpose, or etc.
Identified.
Identified.
Yeah, let's go look at it. Identified as applied to a switch. Recognizable as suitable for the specific purpose, function, use, environment, application, and so forth, where it's described in a particular code requirement.
Just definitions.
Those are all definitions.
Yep. Equipment that is required to be located in sight from other equipment shall be visible and not more than blank feet from the other equipment.
50.
50 feet?
Yeah, so that's in the definition too. Where the code specifies one equipment shall be in sight from, within sight from, and so forth, another equipment. The specified equipment is to be visible and not more than 15 meters, 50 feet distance from the other.
In sight from.
In sight from.
Okay. Yeah, definition. It says it right here. In sight from. Equipment that has been blank is published in a directory by the testing lab certifying that it has met established standards and is acceptable to the AHJ.
Listed.
That's what we were talking about earlier.
That's what we were talking about, yeah. So, listed is going to be right here. Equipment, materials, and service included in the list published by an organization acceptable to our having jurisdiction.
Perfect. Let's see. One of the primary purposes of raceways is to support conductors and protect them from physical blank.
Damage. The whole code is about protecting conductors from physical damage.
Right. The NEC requires that all electrical equipment and conductors be blank to be deemed acceptable to the AHJ.
Approved.
Approved. Another definition. When not specified, all conductors in the NEC are considered to be blank.
Copper.
Okay, that's good to know.
Unless they specify, it's always going to be copper.
Right.
They'll tell you if it's aluminum.
Mm-hmm. All unused openings, other than those intended for operation of equipment, are required to be effectively blank to afford equivalent protection.
Closed, and that's going to be here in requirements for electrical installations. Here it is right here. Unused openings other than those intended for the operation of equipment, part of design, shall be closed to afford protection, substantially equivalent to the wall of the equipment. So that means you got to put a KO seal in there,
Right.
or they can get you right here.
That makes sense. Equivalent protection. Terminals for more than one conductor shall be blank.
Identified. So they're not listed for that. They're identified for that.
Okay.
So it'll tell you right there.
Right. If a splice is underground, the device shall be listed for blank use.
Direct burial. So you have the UF splices. It says on there
Mm-hmm.
for direct burial.
One of the blank shall be readily accessible as required by the NEC.
Disconnecting means on the building. You got to be readily accessible. You got to be able to shut that thing down.
Absolutely.
Let's go through those real quick. So I don't know how to do this.